gigantic hovering triangle was filmed by a Soviet government cameraman in 1968. There is other compelling evidence on the ground. These strange spheres were found at two alleged UFO landing sites. One of these UFOs reportedly attacked a radar antenna near the Soviet city of Samara. It was one of the most shocking UFOs.
Мощное энергетическое воздействие извне. Обгоревшая краска.
Flew near a military base in Samara and then landed right next to a mobile air defense radar unit. Apparently,
по специальности я сапер, по первой своей военной специальности, и могу утверждать, что взрыв произошел вследствие очень мощного.
On the night of September 13, 1990, in the USSR, a triangular, unidentified flying object landed on the grounds of a secret military base performing air defense tasks and attacked a long-range radar station. This occurred near Kuibyshev, now Samara, in the Kino district, not far from the village of Bobrovka. What is known about this military unit? This military unit of the Aerospace Defense Forces was established in 1952 in the village of Bobrovka, Kuibyshev region, as the 77th Separate Radio-Technical Battalion of the Air Surveillance, Warning, and Communication Forces. Its primary mission was to create a radar detection field over the Middle Volga, support the operations of anti-aircraft missile troops and fighter aviation, and monitor airspace over long distances. The unit played a significant role in the Soviet Union's air defense system. The site was surrounded by 2 rows of barbed wire, characteristic of highly classified military installations. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, the CIA declassified reconnaissance images and analyst reports. According to these documents, a mobile radar Tall King, known in the USSR as P-14 Lena, was located at this site. Developed in the late 1950s, this long-range radar was designed to monitor airspace, detect and determine the coordinates, azimuth range, speed, and trajectory of aerial targets at long distances, up to 600 kilometers, and at high altitudes, with excellent resolution even under heavy electronic countermeasures. Additionally, the site presumably utilized mobile radars, such as the P-12 Yenisei, developed between 1954 and 1965. The P-12 was designed for the timely detection and tracking of airborne objects within its visibility zone, determining their national affiliation and providing their coordinates. This radar was capable of detecting aerial targets at distances of up to 200 kilometers. Strangely enough, this event was made public by the official military newspaper of the Volga-Ural Military District for the motherland. The location became widely known to the public, even though, due to the need to maintain state secrecy, the article did not specify the exact site of the long-range radar station. In those days, not only Soviet but also international media, the ufological community, and military personnel from other countries were deeply stirred by this sensational news. Let's reconstruct the timeline of events. On the evening of September 13th, at 5:05 p.m., Captain Dmitry Rudzait, a journalist for the military newspaper Za Rodinu, for the motherland, received a call from a former colleague, who had worked for many years in a special department of the USSR KGB. The colleague reported an extraordinary incident at the radar station. This is how the journalist recalls that day. The very next morning, I found myself at the military site where, in my opinion, the landing of this unidentified flying object had occurred. I managed to speak with officers who operated the military facility, as well as soldiers, sergeants, guards, and those who monitored the equipment and had visual contact with the incident. All of this led me to conclude that the stories about UFOs I'd heard over the years, stories I never believed, are, in fact, real. Lieutenant Colonel Yuri Goloviko, the unit commander, allowed the journalist to speak with eyewitnesses of the incident. At 12:07 a.m., the radar screen detected a large flying object approaching the station from the direction of Kazakhstan. Major Duplin, the combat duty shift commander, reports. Shortly after midnight, the radar screen detected a large flying object approaching the station. The radar signature was so bright, it looked as if a strategic bomber was heading straight for us. The object was no more than 100 kilometers away, and at first, I couldn't grasp what was happening. Think about it. Our station is far from any borders, so where could such a massive, unidentified target have come from? It made no sense. Following my command, the automated identification system was activated. Senior Sergeant Mikitinok immediately reported that the system had failed. It appeared to have received such a powerful response signal that the circuit breakers couldn't handle it. The radar operators tracked the target, and we connected with the Air Defense Command. At that moment, the strategic bomber fragmented. The radar signature turned into a formless cloud, resembling a flock of birds. I've worked with radars for 17 years, and I can easily tell the difference between a flock of birds and an aircraft. For something to glow that brightly on the radar at such a distance, these geese and swans would need to have feathers made of cobalt steel. A bright dot appeared on the display. It emerged from below, but not immediately. It was as if it was materializing, like a photograph developing, gaining speed while moving toward the center. The timestamps in the lower left corner of the display showed 0708. After 2.5 minutes, the target truly disintegrated. The single dot turned into numerous smaller ones. What happened next was even more baffling. At a distance of 42 kilometers, the target reformed. The powerful radar clearly showed its shape, an almost isosceles triangle with flat edges. It was pulsing in sync with the radar's operations. The return signal was much weaker than the one sent out, significantly weaker. This could mean only one thing. The bird was absorbing our signal, having itself a feast. At 12:09 a.m., when the distance to the object had decreased to 5 kilometers, the image on the display disappeared. Here's what Senior Lieutenant Tolit, an officer at the radar station, said. The visitor switched to fully absorbing our waves at a distance of approximately 5 kilometers. When it disappeared from the radar screen, a group led by Captain Laziko emerged from the bunker. At 12:12 a.m., an unidentified flying object passed over the military personnel at an altitude of 10 meters. From Captain Laziko's report, the unidentified object passed right above our heads as we exited the underground facilities. The distance to its underside was no more than 10 meters. We got a good look at it. The perimeter of the station is illuminated by floodlights, so it's always bright here. The underside of the object was smooth but not reflective. It looked like a thick layer of soot. We didn't notice any openings, landing gear, or windows. However, 3 pale blue beams of light were emanating upward from the object. The corners were slightly rounded. At 12:20 a.m., there was no response from Post 4, and the sentry, Corporal Arvidas Blazis, had disappeared. From the report of the guard commander, Senior Lieutenant Gorin, Sergeant Romanov, the duty supervisor, deployed the next shift to their posts, and returned to the guardroom. There was no response from Post 4, where Corporal Blazes was stationed. We waited a few more minutes. Maybe he had been delayed somewhere. But at 0:20 a.m., I made the decision to send the duty supervisor and 2 guards to the post. Blazes was still not responding. From the report of Sergeant Romanov, the guard commander sent us, saying Blazes wasn't responding. He figured maybe Blazes had fallen asleep and told us to check things out. We went to the post, but Blazes was nowhere to be found. The perimeter fence was intact, and the phone sockets were functioning, but there was no sign of Blazes anywhere within the boundaries of his post. I reported the situation to Senior Lieutenant Gorin and stayed at the post to guard it alongside the other sentries. There were 3 of us. At 12:50 a.m., there was no response from Post 3, and the sentry, Private Andrei Veronitsa, had disappeared. From the report of Senior Lieutenant Gorin, after putting the guard unit on full alert, I strengthened the security of all posts and organized a search for Blazes. I asked his comrades if Arvidas might have run off to join his National Army back home. However, I doubted he would have deserted. He had already served for a year and a half, was an excellent soldier, a skilled marksman, and performed well in political training. He had his rifle, 2 magazines, and 60 rounds with him. Half an hour into the search, I received a report from the 3rd post. Another sentry, Private Veronitsa, had disappeared. During this time, the object landed outside the perimeter of the military base, in a field where vegetables were grown for the soldiers. The exact time of the landing is not specified, but subsequent reports indicate it was around 12:30 a.m. From a conversation with Major Duplin, after receiving reports about everything that was happening, I decided to use a short-range radar to locate the object that had landed outside the perimeter. I managed to observe that there were powerful sources of radio emissions at the corners of the triangle. After that, the image disappeared. Corporal Dudnik shared the following. I was on duty at post number 6 and saw a triangle fly over the outer perimeter. It was large, each side about 15 meters. There were no windows, nothing, just black. It descended with a quiet rustling sound, not too fast, and from above, like a helicopter. The triangle was about 3 meters thick, much taller than me. A flash, which struck down the antenna behind me, came from the middle of its side. There were no holes or openings, but it fired with precision. Otherwise, it would have hit me. I was directly in the line of fire. It didn't hit me, but the antenna was destroyed. It burned brightly. From the report of Private Beshmetov, when the fire started, I ran over to Corporal Dudnik. Our posts are adjacent. He was standing near the barbed wire, aiming his rifle at a large black triangle about 100 meters away from the fence. I also prepared to fire, but Sergei shouted at me not to act recklessly. "Look at what it can do," he said. That's when I realized the triangle was what set the antenna on fire. We didn't shoot, and according to regulations, we couldn't. It was beyond the post's boundary. Captain Lazyko shared the following account. I didn't see when antenna number 12 was deployed. I only noticed the flash. It happened inside the perimeter, and by the time we arrived, the engines were scattered around, and the antenna had fallen on its side, burning brightly, like wood, even though it was made of steel. The circular radar antenna had been burned and knocked off its mounting system. The lower of the 2 antennas remained in place, but the upper one was lying on its side, about 3 meters from the remains of the drive mechanisms. The equipment truck, which housed these engines and gearboxes, was melted, with the paint blackened and blistered. The aluminum components of the antenna left the most horrifying impression. They had melted and dripped like liquid. Officers from the engineering division unanimously agreed that the steel components burned as if they were hit with an oxygen torch. Their thickness was reduced to just 1-2 millimeters, and some parts had burned away entirely. At 2 a.m., the UFO ascended and disappeared. Not a single member of the military provided details on how exactly it vanished or flew away. From the report of Private Beshmetov, the triangle ascended about an hour and a half after landing. We had already extinguished the antenna and the grass. The guard commander ordered everyone to return to their posts and check the perimeter fence. When I approached the supply platoon warehouse, Corporal Blazes came around the corner. He seemed surprised to see me on his post, then noticed the others and asked, "Why is everyone running around here?" I asked him where he had been all this time. Arvidas laughed and said, "Are you drunk?" He was heading to the phone to report that he was on duty. Sergeant Romanov reported, Corporal Blazes was found 2 hours after taking his post. He didn't see anything, doesn't remember anything, and says he spent the whole time walking to the phone to call the guardhouse. He didn't see the triangle and is upset, thinking he's being pranked. From the report of Senior Lieutenant Gorin, at the same time as Corporal Blazes reappeared at his post, Private Veronitsa also showed up at his. He doesn't remember anything either and is convinced he was at his post the entire time. According to him, it was as if we all appeared suddenly, like in a split-second scene from a movie. One moment no one was there, and then suddenly everyone was running around with rifles. Corporal Blazes' wristwatch was running 1 hour and 57 minutes slow, while Private Veronitsa's was 1 hour and 40 minutes behind. Both firmly believe they were at their posts, carrying out their duties the whole time. One peculiar detail requires special attention. The serial numbers on Corporal Blazes' rifle and bayonet were missing. The blued steel in those areas was smooth and polished, as if factory-made, but the numbers were completely gone. Major Duplin shared the following. The only one among us who seems to evaluate the situation critically and calmly is the logistics platoon commander, Senior Warrant Officer Voronkov. A seasoned veteran, he planted a large crop of tomatoes beyond the perimeter fence for the soldiers' salads. There were still many late-season varieties he was planning to harvest, and wouldn't you know it, this visitor landed right in the middle of the tomato field. The incident through the eyes of journalist Captain Dmitry Rudzit. I was in a state of intense astonishment from everything I had seen and heard. What I actually saw there was a radar antenna destroyed by an internal explosion. Based on my first military specialization as a combat engineer, I can confidently say that the explosion was caused by an extremely powerful external energy impact. The antenna was scorched, with severely melted metal components, both aluminum and steel, and the gearboxes had been blown several meters away from the antenna's main structure. Even the multi-100-kilogram gearboxes were displaced. The intensity of the impact, which caused the internal oil explosion in the gearboxes, was immense. Some gearboxes were heavily melted, while others were badly charred, leaving the antenna in a horrifying state. On the field where the UFO landed, the leaves, stems, and tomatoes were all mangled and flattened. It seemed as if they had been subjected to a cold volumetric explosion, an immense shockwave that even dented the rocky soil. What's most striking is that the tomatoes didn't splatter. Everything quietly spread across the ground, as if the impact had been stretched out over many minutes. There were no distinct impressions from wheels or supports. Yet, the UFO didn't touch the ground with its underside. Many bushes remained standing, but they looked gelatinous. They weren't broken but deformed by pressure from all directions. In the evening, the journalist returned to the editorial office and reported the incident to the management. Neither the editor nor the executive secretary had any doubts about the authenticity of the facts I had gathered. On September 16th, an article titled "A Starship on the Radar" was published in the latest issue of the military newspaper For the Motherland. Here's what Vladimir Vinsky, chairman of the Samara branch of the All-Russian Ufological Association, Cosmopoisk, and a candidate of geological and mineralogical sciences, had to say about the authenticity of the incident and the events that followed. I spoke with Dmitry Rudzit multiple times regarding the incident at the air defense station near Kuibyshev. The first time was immediately after his article was published in the newspaper for the motherland. At that time, Dmitry swore up and down that the facts presented in the publication were 100% accurate. He even showed me his notebook, where he had recorded the testimonies of military personnel about the UFO. In that notebook were over a dozen names of eyewitnesses, along with their ranks, places of service, the dates of the journalists' conversations with them, and the exact time of the incident itself. I believe that fabricating such records could only be done by an exceptionally cunning hoaxer, someone meticulously planning every detail and deliberately aiming to mislead the global public and all serious researchers of anomalous phenomena. One would have to completely lose faith in people's integrity to suspect a military journalist of such intentions. But then complaints immediately arose against the military journalists who dared to bring such an unusual story to the reader. This was hardly surprising. Calls began flooding into Kuibyshev, first from the Ministry of Defense of the USSR, then from central media outlets, and the following day from abroad. As it turned out, both Soviet and foreign scientists and military officials were asking the Ministry of Defense for permission to visit the site of the incident. It all ended with Colonel General Albert Makashov, the district commander, ordering the chief editor to prepare a retraction and punish the journalist. And so they did. The retraction stated that the article published in the September 16 issue was a piece of science fiction, but due to technical reasons, the final text omitted a line clarifying that the story was purely fictional. Justifying himself to his superiors, the commander of the air defense unit, Lieutenant Colonel Golovaiko, reported that the radar station had indeed burned down, but denied any involvement of anomalous forces in the incident. He claimed that a short circuit in the station's equipment had caused the fire. As for the missing sentry, it turned out he had simply gone on unauthorized leave. As for the second disappearance, it wasn't even mentioned. How simple everything seems. And the point wasn't to establish scientific truth, but to ensure that idle public curiosity didn't disturb anyone's peace. UFOs? Nonsense. Just a short circuit, and that's all. It would be naive to think that a commission composed of military specialists would even slightly validate the version suggesting the involvement of anomalous phenomena in the incident at the classified facility, especially since, from a rational standpoint, the explanation of a short circuit as the cause of the fire at the radar station seems very convincing and logical. And it's not just our military that employs such controversial methods to suppress facts. This position, of course, is understandable. After all, if the leadership of the military district had agreed to acknowledge the involvement of an anomalous object in the incident at the military base, they would inevitably have had to answer a series of very uncomfortable questions. If not created by human hands, then who's brought this triangle into existence? Why was the attack carried out? If the aggression wasn't from our own humans, but from outsiders, aliens, how should one approach this in terms of diplomatic norms? Why was the base not destroyed, and why was no harm inflicted on anyone, with the demonstration of power being limited to the alien technology itself? And so many other questions. It is worth noting that this incident is part of a broader history of UFO sightings of this type during those years. Triangular-shaped UFOs were documented in Belgium between 1989 and 1990. The peak of these events occurred on the night of March 31st, 1990. On that night, unidentified objects were tracked on radar, pursued by 2 Belgian Air Force F-16 fighter jets, and allegedly photographed. Approximately 2,600 eyewitnesses submitted written statements detailing what they saw. Following the incident, the Belgian Air Force released a detailed report on the events of that night. The Belgian triangles were characterized by their triangular shape, black surface, bright lights at the corners, and quiet, smooth movement. The editorial office of the newspaper for the motherland received 6 reports over the course of the week following the article's publication. These reports, from both civilian and military individuals described UFO sightings on the night of September 14, 15. 3 reports came from the Samara region, while the other 3 originated from nearby areas and republics, Bashkortostan, Orenburg region, and Mari El. All the observers noted the object's resemblance to the UFO that had visited the military base.